Researching, developing, and promoting evidence-based practices that enhance mental, emotional, and social conditions in the workplace are essential efforts that support psychological health and safety. We'll hear from someone who is at the forefront of efforts of this type up next on this episode of the Psych, Health, and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych, Health, and Safety USA podcast. As workplace mental health has become a global priority, there's a greater focus on addressing psychosocial hazards. Each week, we look at psychological safety from an occupational health and safety perspective. Let's talk psychological health and safety. Welcome to this episode of the Psych, Health, and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Our goal for each episode is to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. If you've listened to this podcast for a while, you probably know that I've been thinking a lot about what it really means to feel safe at work, not just physically, but emotionally and mentally. And during the 4th International Symposium to Advance Total Worker Health, I first heard about this episode's guest and about something called the Worker Wellbeing Lab. Now, I'll be honest, I didn't even know what that was at first. But the name alone made me pause and think, a lab for well-being, for workers. That's got to be good. So it got me wondering, what are they studying? What are they trying to fix? And how does this connect to the bigger conversation about psychological health and safety? So the idea is that work just shouldn't avoid harm, but should actually support our mental and emotional health. So from what I've started to gather, this lab is a part of a growing movement that's looking at things like burnout, stress, and even how leadership and culture shape our experience of safety, not just from accidents, but safety from silence, from exclusion, and from the kinds of pressure that wears us down over time. So in today's episode, we're going to dig into that just a bit. What is the Worker Wellbeing Lab really doing? How does it help us name and address psychosocial hazards? And what can we learn from their work to make our own workplaces not just safer, but more human? And to start this conversation off, I want to start like I generally do, with an introduction of my guest, by my guest, with this question. Who is Dr. M. Gloria Gonzales-Morales?
Well, thank you, David, and thank you for pronouncing my name in such a beautiful way. The M stands for Maria, but everybody in Spain is called Maria something or something Maria, so we go by the other name, so that's why I'm Gloria. And that tells you a little bit about me. I'm originally from Canary Islands. These islands are on the west coast of Africa, but they're still part of Spain. So we are also kind of European citizens. But we have a lot of roots and cultural connections with the Caribbean, with Venezuela, with Cuba, with Puerto Rico. And even when I speak in Spanish, I don't speak like Castilians do. So it's pretty cool. Like it's part of my identity to think that I'm a mid-Atlantic Latina, so kind of like in the middle of the two spaces. But and because of that, I guess that's why I ended up here in the United States, because I love traveling. I did my PhD in work and organizational psychology at University of Valencia in Spain. And then, and because I really was interested in work stress and how we can fix stress and stressors at work back then. And I also had a feminist perspective on it. So I was looking at what were the different ways that different people in organizations cope with stress according to their gender. At that time, back in the early 2000s, it was men and women. Now we're a little bit more open and comprehensive, thinking about gender as as a spectrum, right? But back then I was just looking at those two things. And then I started to work a little more on work and life, because when you start thinking about gender in the workplace and women in the workplace, of course, the work and family and life starts to be important. And then you start studying that, and then you realize that this is important for everybody. And then you continue studying, and then you realize that there's remote work and flexible arrangements. And actually, it's very interesting how at the end everything is a system that affects us. And depending on our identities and our experiences, we may need more resources or different types of resources to be able to be human at work. So not only a machine that is doing their tasks, but being able to deal with everything else that means to be human. So it is interesting because yeah, I have been doing a lot of research since I started my PhD back in 2001. I came for a postdoc in 2007 to work at George Mason University with Lois Tetrick, who is one of the mothers of occupational health psychology, and meaning like psychological hazards at work and also the psychological determinants of physical health and safety as well, right? Um, so I worked there, then I went to Canada. I spent 10 years in Canada, being an assistant and then an associate professor there. And then when I was sick and tired of shoveling in snow, 10 years later, in 2020, I moved to California, and now I'm a professor of organizational psychology at Claremont Graduate University, where I work with a ton of grad students. I have around, I never know how many. I know that I have more than 13 PhD students working with me at any point in time, because they graduate and then other come, and I'm like, yeah, around 15. That's the size of the Worker Wellbeing Lab. And what else can I say? Um, yeah, I have been there since the pandemic. So the pandemic brought a lot of interesting stuff. Like, for example, this idea of the remote work, yeah, is not something that is affecting only people who have caregiving responsibilities, right? Now it's affecting everybody. So we all had to adapt to it. And now that we're adapted, now a lot of companies are saying return to work. Government, right? Like federal government is telling people that they have to go back to work. Microsoft is telling people that they have to go back to work in February, and a lot of other IT companies. And there's a lot of disruption right now in terms of that, and also AI. That is something that I'm fascinated with, and how is that going to be affecting us as well. So, anyways, that's a long journey. Like whenever people tell me who are you, I'm oh, that's a lot, because my journey takes me everywhere. But I don't want to take up too much space explaining who I am.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. That question, I started off doing that early in the podcast, and I've kind of stuck with it, because when you ask someone who they are, lots of different things come out of people when you ask that question. And none of it's right or wrong. It's just how we see ourselves, and it is what it is. So that question is consistent. My next question is also even more consistent. What does psychological health and safety mean to you?
Wow. Yeah. It means a lot of things. And that was actually the reason why we landed to name our lab the Worker Wellbeing Lab. And mind you, when I came, so before coming to Claremont, my lab in Canada was called the Occupational Health and Positive Psychology Lab. And then I came to California, and I just put a CA next to it, and I was like, oh, that's the name of the lab now, California. But it's funny because Canada and California has the same, so it was kind of weird. So anyways, I had only, like, at that time when I landed in Claremont, I had, I think, three PhD students that had been, someone handed them down to me from other labs. And it was a pandemic, so we were outdoors in a patio, I don't know, a hockey stick away from each other, trying to figure out what we were going to do as a lab. And so that was like how we funded the lab with the PhD students that were working with me. I try never to say my PhD students because I don't own them. The PhD students that were working with me. Um, and we just went through like, no, but I want to study all these things related to stress. And I was like, okay, well, that would be psychological health. And then other people would be like, but I actually want to figure out what it means to be able to do the work that is related to their calling. And I was like, oh, calling, work, purpose. Okay, that's more like a positive psychology interest. So that kind of is related to flourishing. And then I had other people that were like, I really want to understand how women in STEM sciences can actually be able to do the work with, feeling that they belong there and being able to be successful. Why there's no more women that are Nobel Prizes. Like, so it was like, oh, okay, so there's a diversity aspect to it. So then we decided that we were going to call it a Worker Wellbeing Lab with a tagline that kind of said clearly what we were doing. And the tagline is a feminist lab. And that was really important for me to put the feminist in there because I wanted people to understand that the type of research that we're doing comes from in academia, we will call it an epistemology, right? Like a stand, a perspective that comes from the idea that we want to figure out ways of smash the systems of oppression. Call it patriarchy, call it white supremacy, call it there's a word for all these systems. It's called the hierarchy, but not a lot of people know it. But anyways, so I wanted to have that tagline: a feminist research lab for health, belonging, and flourishing. So, and when I'm thinking health, I'm not only thinking mental health. Like I know, for example, since I studied in my PhD that psychosomatic complaints are actually potential just reflections of mental health problems. So you may have a horrible back pain, but it is coming from actually being strained from a stress experience. And now you go to the chiropractor or to the PT, but you still are stressed at work, right? And not. And now, like, and it's like, okay, so we're fixing this, but we're not fixing that, right? So it's really important to, or this doesn't ever get fixed. And your massage therapist makes a lot of money, and that's good because massages you can do for yourself, but you're going to continue going because this is not fixed, right? Then, and that's what you say you have in your book, right? Like the cycle. Well, yeah. So all these aspects are important, and also the safety. I started my career in occupational health when I was doing my undergraduate in psychology in Canary Islands. So I was doing psychology. I wanted to be a clinical psychologist. Of course, I wanted to do that. Everybody who starts studying psychology wants to end up like doing therapy or there's like the people that actually want to like actually work with people with weird disorders like schizophrenia and like all these things. So I was one of those people. And then I did my practicum, my first practicum, and I ended up working in a day center for people with mental health disorders. And I was working with them, and it was really, really fulfilling, but also it was very, very, very hard, especially because there's cases where even having like double of their medication, doing therapy with them, still like there was, it was really, really hard. And I have to say, I was a coward. I was not courageous enough to go on with that one. So then I decided that because I had done all the other electives on work and organizational psychology, so how do we apply psychology to work? And I have done a nice term paper on work stress and what that meant and stuff like that. Like a tiny undergraduate paper. I was like, I really want to figure this out. So I did a second practicum on occupational health and safety. And I ended up working as an intern for the Canarian Service of Occupational Health and Safety.
Really?
Yes.
So that'd be the Canary Islands equivalent of OSHA.
Yes.
Okay.
Little tiny, but
Right.
yeah.
Right. Right.
And at that time, we're talking about this is 1999, I believe. And the law to implement occupational health and safety protocols in Spain had been, yeah, we knew that the law was coming. And in 99, it was published, and everybody had to be ready to. No, I think the law was from 95, and people had until 99 to get their protocols, everything done. So I spent like months and months going to different organizations and evaluating if they had the protocols, or what we were doing was more than evaluating, where we were advising, even though, of course, companies perceive this as auditing, but it wasn't auditors. We weren't auditing them. We were like helping them go through that. And I learned so much about how safety is not only about having the safety equipment. And I know that a lot of people know all this, right? But I learned so much about how safety is not about having the safety equipment, but having a culture and a climate of safety that supervisors actually use the safety equipment, and they expect everybody to use the safety equipment. And I actually learned also all the different ways that the way that, for example, people in construction used to get paid back then. They will get paid by how many pieces of things were done. Like there's some kind of, I don't know how to say those things in English, but some kind of like internal scaffolding of buildings. So if you finish 3 one day, you get paid 300 that day. If you finish 2, you get to pay 200. So therefore, you're not going to use safety equipment. You're not going to get like attached to things, because it's going to prevent you from, from doing those 3. You're going to be only going to be doing 2, right? So I learned a lot of those intricacies that, at the end, like they're all that, like that, it makes sense. But if you want to fix this, you actually have to think about this. Like, what about like how much can we pay on some set of IP? If you want to, diminish the amount of people that get killed in the job. So that's what mental health and safety means to me. It's like it's a spectrum that goes from being alive every day when you come back home, and being able to flourish and being able to live your calling, like one of my students, Megan Benzing, studied in her dissertation. And also in the middle is the ability to be able to establish high quality connections with everybody at work. Like, for example, Alisa Birbam did in her dissertation, or your ability to be able just to do your work without any BS from other people because you're a woman in STEM, like Cici Corson now did in her PhD dissertation. And these are the 3 people that were the founding members of the Worker Wellbeing Lab, and now they are doctors and doing amazing job out there.
Right. Right. I I I I love that journey you just took us on the origins of the lab, because so a few thoughts. One is, I think we're being disingenuous as humans when we say we can build something that's for everybody. I just don't think we can. You can't build any one thing that's going to work for everybody. There's 8 billion people, so obviously it's not going to work for everybody. But where it becomes difficult is you build it for one group and then you say it's for me, and you're just not honest about it. And in the description that you gave, you're very clear. This comes from a feminist perspective. That's where we start. So if you're not really into that, you might not be as interested in this as we are. I'm not saying you're a bad person. We're just saying in this environment, this is focused on feminists. And then we go on from there. And, I often, well, I've come to observe that the vast majority of the institutions, organizations, systems, policies, practices, whatever in the United States were built for and by 8% of the global population. They were. And the other 92% get to squeeze their way in and twist myself up into a pretzel and so I can be a part of this thing. And again, I'm not suggesting that there's something wrong or bad about the 8%, but the other 92% shouldn't have to twist ourselves. So why don't we create systems that are clear about this is what we're trying to do? This is who this is for. It's not to the exclusion of everyone else, but this is what we're interested in. And the extent to which we can address this, a lot of the things that you create from a feminist perspective will benefit everybody. It's just a different lens on the same problem, as opposed to so the Occupational Safety and Health Act, when was passed by the 91st Congress here in the United States, only 2% of the people who were involved in approving it were women. 2%. So when the guys looked at it, of course they said his work, his employment, his this, his, and here we are 50 plus years later, and the act still, it's like it was written by a bunch of guys because it was. But unfortunately, that focus on his employment forgot about her employment or their employment. That it's not that you did that intentionally, but you left out those views. You didn't spend enough time focusing on those perspectives. So you obviously can't solve some of those challenges. And the idea is trying to get people to open up and say, okay, what are you for? And if you're for everybody, then you got to drop that. We got to redesign this thing. It's got to be redesigned. It's got to be redesigned.
Yes, and actually, that's the work that I have been doing on my own for the last, I don't even know, like I think it has taken me like more than 5 years to write this paper that is finally published in Organizational Dynamics. And it's like very dear to my heart because it's like one of these papers that you just, it's more like a review in order to, because it's in a journal that is for managers and for applied practice. So it's a review to tell people like, okay, we need to change culture. We need to change the fundamental values on top of which our organizations are built. And what I say is like, we can be doing as much DEI as we want. And I think that actually one of the problems and one of the reasons why we have so much backlash from DEI efforts is because a lot of them had been focused on helping people squeeze by.
Right.
So then, of course, those 8% or whoever who's already inside, they say like, wow, that person is like, what is this? Are now people like, what? Right? So I do understand the backlash. I do understand. I did share it. But I do understand it. And actually, like a lot of things that happen in the workplace in terms of harassment, just simple incivility, like people that never get invited to go for lunch with the others, or those things are coming from what I call in my paper toxic power cultures. And what Jennifer Berdal, who's the greatest scholar who's in Vancouver, she calls masculinity contest cultures. What she says is like, hey, like all our organizations are based on some kind of understanding that the job or the workplace is a place where we compete with each other.
Yes. Yeah. Again, so the 8%, for those, who may not have done the math, the 8% is white men. I mean, it is that if you look at the global population, 8% of the global population meet the definition of a white man. And the challenge is when we try to compare everybody else to what a white man thinks is a good idea. And again, I'm not suggesting that their ideas are good or bad. That's not the point. The point is, you're not the only person in the environment. You've just been there longer, and there's a lot of reasons for that. Some of them are actually toxic. Some of them are just lack of familiarity. There are people that get concerned and threatened when I walk in the room because of the color of my skin, because they've not been exposed to me, and the exposure that they have had has been from a particular frame. It's been from a particular perspective. And again, I'm not suggesting that they're all racist, or I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting you don't know about me because you've never really been around me, and you're not going to learn me until we get to be in the same spaces, until we can communicate with each other. And my voice and your voice have to have equal weight, not my voice trying to convince you that I'm just as good at some things or just as bad at other things as you are. But that doesn't make me less of a person. I have just as much right to be here. I have just as much right to participate as you do. So why don't we look at the frame itself and the organization itself? Why do we have to do these particular things? Why do people get promoted when they do these kinds of things? And a lot of the things that are done are, a man would like it, a white person would like it, a straight person would like it, an able-bodied person would like it. But then we invited different people who just don't see it that way.
Exactly. And that's the issue, that we are, you know, how they have this metaphor about a fish that asks the other fish, is like, oh, this water is really warm. And the other fish says, what is water?
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that that's the culture where we are embedded. That is like, you know, someone who's fully able and someone who's not fully able says, hey, do you know that can I find a way of doing this? Like, for example, I don't know, like, for example, I have chronic pain. So every time I go to a conference, I need I need a top chair so I can at least sit and deal with the pain without having to be like standing and stuff like that. And people like, that's like, what is water, right? Like, we don't have high top chairs in places for people that have mobility issues. Like, we have certain things because, like, you know, places for wheelchairs, and that's perfect. But there's no, you know, there's a lot of things that you don't see because you don't have that need. Uh, so I think that when I listen to Jennifer Berdal talking about masculinity context cultures, and the fact that every single thing that we have done with DEI has failed, or it doesn't work, or it works just up to, like, there's always a ceiling effect. Like in 2000, I think I was in Canada, 2015 or something. I think she was preparing her paper about all this. And I left the room thinking, and what she was saying is that until we don't change culture, we will not be able to advance. And I left the room really, really, really depressed. The same way that I left the theater when I watched An Inconvenient Truth.
Right. Right. Right.
I was
About
like,
about the environment.
I
Exactly.
was like, yeah, I
Right.
know everybody has to do all these things, but it's impossible. And I was just super deflated. So same thing. Like when someone like illuminates something that is like, this is a systems issue, it's really hard to change. And until we don't change it, things don't want change. And you're like, oh no. So since then until now, I have been trying really hard to figure out what are other frameworks, what other like concepts and constructs, what we can do to slowly change those cultures. And for me, for example, calling my lab a feminist lab for me was part of my, I'm putting out there that we are for anti-oppressive management and anti-oppressive organizational psychology. This is what we're trying to say. So now, like that paper that I'm telling you about is called From Toxic to Brave: How to Transform Cultures from Toxic Power Cultures to Brave Relational Cultures. And the toxic to brave is really intentional, because the idea is to tell men in general, white men specifically, that being a man is so good. It's such a good thing, but not in the toxic way. You have to go from toxic to take one of those things, like, you know how when we think brave, we think man, right? We think masculine. Okay, take that one. Take the brave, the courage, and actually like speak for people that cannot speak up. Be a true ally that get in front of the bullets, that amplify the voices of others, that is behind you when you need support. Like, be a true ally, be brave to do that, and focus on the relationships with other people. So you have to be a brave man, but with that relational that relational orientation that is more associated with that femininity in the workplace.
Do you need more psych health and safety in your life? Then head over to the FlourishDX Academy for several free on-demand e-learning courses. If you're an internal professional, follow FlourishDX on Eventbrite to register for any of our free fortnightly interactive webinars. Our flagship professional practice program is also exclusively available for internal professionals. The 12-week course blends theory, applied practice, and interaction with other professionals through live lectures and a monthly community of practice session. Find out more about all these learning opportunities or inquire about a bespoke in-house training at the FlourishDX Academy. www.45003.org. Now back to this episode.
I'm proudly raised by in a single parent household, and the only parent was a woman. As a matter of fact, I can't think of any male role models that helped me as I was coming up. My dad I've never met. My uncles were alcoholics. My grandfather was an alcoholic. I met a few male role models as an adult at work. That was it, because I was the oldest. So as a matter of fact, I have 3 sons, and I've told all of them that I don't have any idea how this is supposed to be done because I don't have a model. I'm doing what I think needs to be done, and I need to hear from you whether it works or not. Because it might not. This is what I have. This is what I can offer. If it doesn't work, I really need to hear your voice, because otherwise I'll do the things that I do all the time, and not because I intend to do them wrong or intend to be bad. But another point that you something that you said that makes me think. I personally, and I think I'll just speak for myself. I want to be more than just an ally. I want to be an accomplice. Because the allies will stand on they'll wave while you're, going in there. Yeah, I'm really with you while you're taking all the arrows. The accomplice is going to get in the getaway car with you. And get in the getaway car and not try to take the wheel.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's actually like something that I work with a former PhD student that I worked with at University of Guelph when I was in Canada. And we learned about this consensual allyship model that comes from actually activists from indigenous communities on the Northwest. And I will send you like the link to be able to, because that's very important for me, to give credit to who created these ideas, because these are ideas that were created by the people that were trying to do activism work from within communities and dealing then with allies that wanted to support them. And they came up with this idea of consensual allyship that kind of like get to that accomplice, being an accomplice. Because consent is really important when we are working with a community, or not even a community, like another person in your workplace that you see that they need support to be squeezed in. And consensual allyship is actually like the idea that you actually have to have a continuous conversation, and that you as an ally need to be asking for consent all the time, or proactively, like, hey, let's talk about if this happens, would you be okay with me being in front, or do you want me to be in the side? And that's when Thomas Sasso, that is a student that worked with me when I was in Guelph, and I were thinking about that there's this directionality model of allyship, but it has to be consensual. And there's this conversation that where you're like all the time asking. And there's times when you're asking and the other person says like, look, I don't have time for doing this. You read on that. And then if you want, we can converse on that, but I'm not going to give you a lecture because I don't have the time to educate all my allies, right? And that's another thing that it was interesting after during COVID, when everybody started to read How to Be an Anti-Racist, right? Like a lot of people were trying to do the work because a lot of Black folks were like, I'm exhausted.
Yeah, exactly.
Just do your work and read these things. And, so anyways, the directional model is really interesting because it's the idea of, okay, as an ally, you're going to have conversations about when you put yourself in front of the person. So when, for example, the arrows are coming in, you have a shell, they don't. So you come and you do it. When do you get next to the person? So for example, for amplifying their voice, you let the person have like be the speaker, and then if there's an opportunity, you amplify the voice, right? Like that's being next to. And then being behind, meaning that you're there for whenever they need you, but you are not putting yourself in front of them. For example, in a manifestation, a demonstration, when there's all these women's demonstration and there's men in the front row saying, I'm a feminist. No, I'm sorry. You go to the back. And you are there because you want to be one more body to be counted, but not one body to be photographed, right? So that directional model is allowing us to explain allyship in terms of like when is allyship real allyship, consensual allyship, as these indigenous activists were talking about, as opposed to performative allyship, that is the one that just does the thing for just for doing it. And and now you can understand why, I understand psychological health and safety from here to here in the spectrum, because I have gotten dirty with so many different things that are related to being human.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. So much I want to dig into, but in the interest of making sure we help people understand what really is it like being the director of the Worker Wellbeing Lab. What does that feel like at this point? You talked about how you started with like 3 people, and every year there's a different group of somewhere between 12 and 15 folks who come in. What does that world look like for you as the director of this lab?
So so the lab is really interesting because when I was in Canada, I was in an institution where I had undergraduate students, master's students, and graduate students. So I also had around between 15 and 20 people every semester that were doing different projects. And I had it scaffolded. So master's students were working with undergrads, PhDs were working with master's students. We had lines of research that kind of like got built that way, right? With the students doing their different projects and stuff. Now, fast forward to 2020, and I arrived to Claremont Graduate University, meaning I don't have undergrads. So my Worker Wellbeing Lab is a lot of students who are completing their PhD, so working with me for at least 4 years, 4 to 5 years, and doing first a master's thesis and then an independent research project that is called a dissertation that you have to finish to get your PhD. And the lab is a mix of people coming from so many different places, but all of them, what gets them together is their love for worker well-being, like for an aspect of how to make organizations better for individuals. So right now I have a student. Well, no, I don't have anybody. Again, I'm not being possessive. In the lab, there's research associates, because I like to call them research associates. Emily Zavala, for example, used to work at 911 in the LA County office, right? Like for the police. She is doing so much work on trying to figure out how we can train better 911 operators so they don't suffer vicarious trauma, for example.
Wow. Okay.
Right? So she's doing all these things, trying to figure out if actually, like, her thesis was about is tenure on the job making you better, like more resilient to this? But that the problem is that the more tenure, the more probabilities of having vicarious trauma. So what is right? So we were doing a couple of experiments there, and now she's working on her dissertation to explore that a little bit more, because it was hard to pinpoint. Then I have, so Emily is like kind of finishing up, but then as she's finishing up, I have Josh Sanchez, who was a police officer in LA as well, and he just left all that, and now he wants to do research on trying to figure out how he can get police officers to ask for help and to use the mental health facilities and services that are there, because there's so many push and pull factors that prevent them from doing that. And among them, not being able to work, not being able to pick up extra shifts, then not being able to make the money that they need to make, all these things, right? So I have two that are very deep into first responders. Then I have other student who is a returning person after retirement. He has decided he wants to do a PhD. So imagine our lab meetings is like at least 10 people every single week, and we're talking about research, and you have the expertise of someone who was working with a lot of startups and entrepreneurs, and talking about yeah, this is what the real work is, and then other people talking about policing, and then all the people that just finished their undergrad and they're doing their PhD, and they're really interested in learning about how can we make things that, I have 3 students right now that are working on intersectionality, meaning for example, Rachel Worrell is working on how much code switching when we present ourselves in LinkedIn, Black women have to do, and how that is making the difference in if they get called for an interview or not.
Right.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And I
Absolutely.
have another two looking into work family issues and LGBTQ employees. That is Martina Stuse. And then I have Jumi Park, who's doing East Asian Americans and the bamboo ceiling. But for that, intersectionally, because she's looking at women, how much women are affected by that as well. So we're trying to figure out all these issues now. We're getting more complex, right? Until now we go oh, okay, what is the research on the difference between African Americans and white people, or this or that? But actually, intersectionality has been something that has been, at least from a law perspective, been something that started to come up 20 years ago. But because it's so complex, we haven't advanced much on understanding what that means.
We have not. And the other area where we have not, part of me suggests that we don't even approach it is we continue to try to find ways to address the response to the things that we've been exposed to, but not addressing the things themselves. So, I spent 3 decades of my life in the fire rescue service, and there are some things that I've had to address based on what I was exposed to, but the thing that happened to me is happening to other people right now. And my question is, why? Why are we not addressing that? So if we're going to, the definition of my research around psychosocial hazards, it's a psychosocial factor that's perceived or experienced by the person exposed to it as somehow threatening to them. And that's what makes it a hazard. It's not that it's inherently bad, but it's a hazard to me based on my life, on my experience, how I'm feeling today. And what we don't do often enough is build work around people. We try to fit people around the work. This is the way it has to be done. Well, why? Who said that? Who determined that thing had to be done that way? I'm okay when we start talking about similar or even identical outcomes. I'm good with that. For example, when you play a football game, you win if you score one more point than the other person. I get that. But there are a bunch of different ways. I could run the ball, pass the ball. I could kick, field. I could do all kinds of different ways to get there. I could cheat. That's so. Again, my issue isn't that we've determined what the outcome is. My issue is determining how we get there. So if you want everybody to be rich, I'm cool with that. So why does it work for you and not work for me? Everybody should be healthy. I'm agreeing with that. why are you healthy and I'm not? Because I did the same thing that you did. And the issue is often not about what we do or when we do it. It's about how. It's about how. It's about these frames that get created that say it has to be done this way. Who said that? And if I look at the person who said that, it was probably somebody who benefited by doing it that way. Absolutely. So when we're talking about the workplace, absolutely we should agree about what success of this business is. I'm okay about making money. I'm fine with that too. But why is it that us making money, I end up taking most of the risk? I end up being, don't make my share of the money. You make plenty and I don't make enough. Why is it that my health has to be affected by that? And this conversation about our role in this. And I might be okay with you making more than me, but I want to have a voice in that and not just assume it's going to be that way, because frankly, if you're willing to take on more of the responsibility, I'm cool with you making more, because I don't want to work that hard or I don't want to do that thing. But we have to be able to have a conversation about it. We do. That's the issue.
Yeah, it is.
Let's talk. Let's communicate.
It is.
Absolutely. Wow. Well, I, as I said before we started, I had no idea really where this would go, but now I just got more questions and concerns that I definitely could not ask in this short period of time. So if there are others out there that are like me that have heard what you've shared, and we have more questions, we want to learn more about the lab, want to know more about you and what you do and all that. What's the best way to follow the work that you're doing, to stay in contact with people who want to do that? How would people best do that?
So they can send me an email, and we can put it in the titles of the of the web of the recording. Also, we have a website at cgu.edu. So if you look for Worker Wellbeing Research CGU on Google, it should come up. But we can also put the link in there. I used to be very active in what it used to be Twitter. But then when it stopped being Twitter, that stopped. But we used to be able to do a lot of things there. I guess that I have to go back to social media at some point.
Not really. Not if you don't want to.
But yeah, like we're revamping our website to be able to provide with more services. We actually have a place in our services and consulting where people can even download things. We have a guide on how to be an inclusive person in STEM, and it's just like a job crafting guide where you can start like working through what are the things that I can do better in my workplace. If you're one of those 88%, if you want to do the work, it's kind of like an allyship training. We'll have like a self-diagnostic instrument that Noelia Argote Belize did, where it's like allyship readiness. So it's a skill to figure out where you are and where you should start doing things if you want to be a true ally and not a performative ally. So yeah, we're slowly uploading stuff that people can use, and yeah, I will give you all my links so you can put it down here.
Yeah, right. Absolutely. Wow. I it is always exciting for me to get people on the podcast who have real expertise in these topics. And because I don't say that because I necessarily am just looking for any and everyone, but often here in the United States, I get people talking about their experience of our current workplaces, because I think that's important. People need to know there's a reason why some of us want to see things more psychologically healthy and safe, because they're not now, because they were never designed to be. But if we're going to get better, we need folks just like you who are actually doing the research, who are trying to figure out what are the best ways, because there's lots of ways there, and there's lots of paths to take, and different paths for different people based on what they've already been exposed to. I've been hallucinating, hypothesizing, talking about something that this idea I created called the psychosocial deterioration pathway. And it's really the connection between harm and trauma, or between hazards, I should say, harm and trauma. People don't get traumatized for no reason. There was a root cause that often we never get. So we will treat the trauma, we'll get people therapy, we'll do all these things to try to repair the damage. But when are we going to trace it back to the root cause? There was a root cause, and sometimes those root causes just stay there. And I believe that the way that work is currently constructed, there are parts of it that are hazardous to people. And we have to call that out. We have to call it out. Parts, not everything, doesn't make either of us bad people. Doesn't say that we're horrible employers. It doesn't say we're not all even toxic necessarily. It doesn't mean it was healthy because it wasn't designed to be healthy. And efforts such as what the Worker Wellbeing Lab is engaged in is to create healthy from the start. How do we? Let's make it healthy from the start. It'll still never be perfect because, to your point, there's this ongoing assessment because the world's changing. People are changing. And what was healthy in 2020 may not necessarily be healthy in 2025 or in 2035.
And actually with AI, that's the next frontier, even though I don't like to use that term because it's very colonizing. But but it is. I have been thinking a lot about it lately, but it actually it really cements this idea that we need to become more relational and that we have to focus on how we can create these high quality connections with each other, because that's the only thing that is going to be left in the workplace that is human. So we have to learn to be human, because the robotic interactions and the robotic efficiency, that's coming. We don't have to worry about that.
That's right. That's exactly right. Exactly right.
So can we just be human in the workplace?
Exactly right. Yeah, exactly right. Thank you so much, Dr. Morales, for this mind-blowing experience of hearing more about the Worker Wellbeing Lab and the work that you all are doing. I really appreciate it. Appreciate the time that you've taken to share with me and the audience. And I think it's going to be very helpful. Yeah. So if you're watching or listening to this podcast for the first time, thank you. Welcome. I hope something you've heard will bring you back to a future episode. Previous episodes of the podcast can be found at psychhealthandsafetyusa.com. You can watch, like, subscribe, and share the podcast on the Flourish DX YouTube page. And please do join the Psych Health and Safety USA movement by becoming a subscriber and connecting with us on LinkedIn. So until next time, stay tuned and look out for the next episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Tune in each week for new episodes of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. If you have a story or know of one that needs to be told, reach out to us on LinkedIn or send an email to david@id2-solutions.com or go to the Flourish DX website at flourishdx.com. We'll see you next time.